Welcome back to the Rebel's Edge and our hosts, SIBO Global Markets. That's what's behind me here at the Chicago Board Option Exchange Global Markets headquarters. Folks, we're going to be telling you about, yes, another unusual activity that resulted in a big moonshot, boom, to the upside. We'll have that and a lot more on the Rebel's Edge. Bang! Yeah, there's only so many folks that shoot live from a real trading floor, not just a simulated trading floor like Pete. How many times do you hear anybody really make a trade? I love the guys at the New York Stock Exchange, but they don't make a trade.
No.
I mean, if they do, they're typing it into a machine, and the trade is happening in Carteret, New Jersey, in the data center. But these guys, the men and women behind me here, folks, that's SIBO Global Markets, just like you see right up there. And this is where the S&P 500 and the VIX and several other of the major contracts still trade in open outcry, Pete. It's the last bastion of open outcry.
I'll tell you what, John, is there anything better than the real thing, though? And you being a real trader, I'd like to say I'm a real trader as well. But a lot of folks talk the talk, but did they walk the walk? I don't know. Let's ask them.
Yeah, we could literally take the camera out into the pits. Maybe next time we'll do that, Pete. But I'm right at the edge of the pits, folks. And as you might imagine, a lot of folks just have terminals in front of them like crazy, just like if you were trading in an upstairs trading room, except these men and women are open outcry, buy, sold, like that. I mean, it's still pretty cool to see. And Chicago's lucky to still have it. All right, Pete. We get together 4 days a week, folks. This is our last day of the week. It's Thursday. Friday, we travel. So Pete and I basically break down for you the macro minute. We don't waste your whole hour on it like some people do. We do fantastic futures, and I know the guys at the CME appreciate that, as well as SIBO Global Markets, Pete, because both of them have futures exchanges. And then we cover some stocks. So Pete Najarian, right over, well, I guess he's there. And I will break it down for you with Jared Wankman handling all the difficult tasks. All right, Pete, macro today, I'm going to say, how many people out there know that NVIDIA, $700 stock, is putting a ton of money into the picks and shovels, just like back in California gold rush days, which the 49ers, that's why they're named the 49ers, folks, because it was 1849 when that gold rush was happening. But the picks and shovels, that's like Levi Strauss with blue jeans. That's like literally picks and shovels for the gold rush. They made most of the real money with those two things. And NVIDIA's thinking ARM Holdings is going to make a lot of money because of what we do over at NVIDIA. So they're making big investments in a lot of these picks and shovels.
Yeah, I think that's a great one, John. I'm going to give you something that's definitely macro, and it might not be all that interesting for people, but I'll bring it up anyway. Japan. It's no longer the third largest economy, John. They just got passed up by Germany. So at one point in time, not that terribly long ago, they were the second largest economy. Then they moved to the third largest economy, and now they've slid all the way down to the fourth. And they are in our recession. So interesting. I'd at least keep an eye on things overseas, all the different spots overseas. But specifically when you get to China and Japan and that type of thing, I think it's definitely worth at least knowing what's going on over there as well. So that's my macro.
All right. Well, that's very good, macro. What about fantastic futures?
Fantastic futures.
Well, fantastic futures, Pete. I'm going to say Bitcoin today because yesterday it broke through 50 and then 51,000. And we told you in the Asian session, it traded through 52. It's through 52 again in the regular session today, Pete. So Bitcoin futures over 52,000. You miss a little, You miss a lot.
Yeah. It's funny, John, just not too terribly long ago, I was highlighting the fact that cocoa was absolutely ripping. It's up like 150%. It's been on an absolute incredible run, bottom left to upper right, 5,600 to 5,800. Call that the high points that it's been able to get to. And why is that? Well, because of the fact that it both with sweets, but also with medicine. So those are some demands that are very, very large. We're just coming off Valentine's Day and everything else. Pretty interesting to see what's going on.
Yeah, well, and why not mention it around Valentine's Day, Pete? Because you know what the main ingredient, or at least the most important ingredient, main ingredient might still be sugar for a lot of chocolate that people get, but you just can't have chocolate if you don't have cocoa, Pete. All right. What about AppLovin, APP? This is a stock Pete and I have talked about before, and I'm having to yell louder because the pit's getting louder, folks. But the AppLovin saw unusual activity just a little bit ago. So what's unusual activity? Pete and I follow when unusual activity occurs, and then we post it up on our blog. So in this case, Pete, they were buying upside calls in AppLovin. There you see it right there on the screen. And AppLovin last night closed at 46.87. Well, today trades through 57 bucks a share, Pete. So the right to buy it, at 50 is becoming richer and richer by the minute. So that's what I had to say about this one. The stock was up like 28% in pre-market trading in the past 12 months, Pete, up 200%.
It's been an absolute unbelievable run, John. When you take a look at the revenue up only 35% year over year, I mean, that's a pretty damn good number, right? I mean, that's crushing it. Their earnings, 49 cents. A year ago, there were zero. So it gives you a little bit of an idea. This company is moving in the right direction. They're absolutely crushing it, pushing right up against the 52-week highs today, which is right up there close to 59. Everything seemed to have gone well, John. They also have some shorts, and those shorts are not feeling it today, man, although maybe they are feeling it. They're not feeling it in a good way, though. But and you look at a company like this with the free cash flow, about $1 billion, not so bad. And by the way, even with this run, John, based upon the numbers that they're putting out there, well, the forward PE looks like it's about a 27. I wouldn't call that stretched on a company that can grow the way this one is.
Yeah, and what do? Just like the name implies, folks, AppLovin. They basically help people turn those apps into cash.
Yep.
That's their modus operandi. That's why they exist. And they're apparently doing a great job for their customers, Pete. And a lot of those apps making a lot of money. All right, let's talk about DWAC, because this is Digital World Acquisition Corp. They got the approval to merge with Trump's Truth Social. And for that reason, the stock traded to almost 60 today. So that was a big jump. It's one of those social media platforms, that competes with Elon Musk's Twitter. And there are several. I mean, it's Parler, it's Snapchat, and so forth. And if you wanted to say Instagram, or at least parts of Instagram, but this one's been growing, Pete. And the fact that, we're coming up to the election and so forth, and that this is what the former president uses, I think it's going to spread the word. And it's already up almost 6 times what the value was when the deal was, or when the acquisition corp or SPAC was $10, because that's where they all come out, is $10.
This thing's on an unbelievable run in the last year. It's only up 275%. That's all. I mean, what a run this thing's been on, John. And it's pressing up there once again, as you just pointed out. It was up 18% last I looked. It could be higher or lower, I don't know. But this regulators actually giving them that approval is definitely something very huge. And you're seeing the volume just absolutely explode as well, like you would expect. So they've done a great job. This thing has certainly been moving from the bottom left to the upper right in a hurry. Continues to do so, John. I don't know what the high end would be, but I would think that going into this whole presidential voting and changing year that we're in here, 2024, should be pretty interesting as we get a little bit deeper into the year, right? As we get to June and July, and all of a sudden the next thing you know, you're not too far away from that election itself, I think this is something that certainly has a lot more upside potential, at least.
Well, it's been a stock that's controversial, of course, as the former President Trump is always controversial.
Yeah.
So we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll keep reporting on it for you folks. How about this one, Pete? SunPower. This, they didn't have great earnings. I will be the first to say it. And Pete and I usually focus on three things. We focus on, did they beat top line, which is, revenue? Did they beat bottom line, which is the net profit? Or did they give positive guidance? That's not what's driving this one to the upside today, Pete. What's driving it to the upside is they got almost $200 million in additional financing because that's what they needed. And people recognized that fact. A bunch of analysts came out and started talking about it. And you know what? We had unusual activity in it, meaning that people were buying the 4-strike calls with the stock at $3.30 a little bit ago. So there it is. Stock traded all the way up to 5 something today, Pete. I see 507 on the screen. I think it went higher. But bang, that's a big winner because, you paid a little for those calls and they became worth a lot. That's why Pete and I talk about it. And that's why you should check out itsnotanoption.com and claim your free book at itsnotanoption.com.
Yeah, people need to know about the options world, John. As a matter of fact, right now, February, we're averaging over 50 million contracts per day. And for the year, we were averaging about 48 million contracts per day, which is a jump again this year, which we've had a jump almost every single year. But it's absolutely incredible, John, and I'm not so sure that that's going to stop. People are learning, they're educating, and they're understanding the options world. The last thing I'd say about SunPower, because you covered it very well, solar has been ripping. They needed this infusion, this raise of money, though. That was something that was definitely needed. But one other positive that does stand out, because not a lot of positives outside of that, they did add 16,000 customers. So they are growing. They obviously just need that capital to be able to service things the right way. So I think this is something, and we've seen a lot of solar companies over the last couple of weeks popping into some of these areas where we like to highlight when we're seeing something moving. This is just another one added to that whole thing. And the alternative energy world is getting more and more attractive to people, especially when you start seeing that crude price get up over 78, John.
Yeah, well, best earnings in 9 years, but they still weren't fantastic earnings, but they were the best earnings in 9 years, Pete. So if you're looking for some company to make a turn, and it's a $3 company that quickly, like that, becomes a $5 company, put that in terms of, if it was a $30 stock and it became 50, everybody'd be talking about it. But Pete and I aren't everybody. We see what's going on behind the curtain, and we try to share that with you. All right, fastly, Pete. Cloud computing, it makes things work faster. Well, today it's making the stock go down faster because it was down 10, 15, 20. Now it's down 30% on the day. Basically, the company's outlook is why the stock's trading lower, Pete. Revenue, they expect a range of 131 million to 135 million. People had been looking for more. They'd been looking for north of 136, I think, million on the rev side. And that's one of those things that if you don't have an announcement like SunPower, where they said, hey, we brought in a lot of money, people are going to look at your guidance and say, maybe you were a little too optimistic. Let's shave some dollars off of this thing. And they did.
Well, the amazing thing about this one, John, is exactly everything you said. When you actually look at their quarter, it wasn't too bad at all, really, quite frankly. The revenue growth was 15% year over year. That sounds pretty good. But the lofty expectations, that's part of the problem. So they missed on the revenue estimates because of that. They did beat on the earnings, but like you said, when you forecast and it's below what they're looking for revenue, when it's below what they're looking for in terms of the earnings, that's never a good thing. You and I talk about it all the time. Last I looked, the stock was, I think, down about 28%. It's getting absolutely clocked. And it was 52 weeks. It's been between 11 and call it 25. Now sitting a little bit south of about 17. So the stock definitely taking it on the chin right now, John.
Well, it's not a good day to be a shareholder of Fastly, that's for sure. And we can make all kinds of jokes about it, but the bottom line is it is just experiencing some tumult. I'll use that word, Pete. That was one of my thesaurus words of the day. All right, let's take a look at Red Zone Sports, Pete, because every day you break down a couple things that pretty soon ESPN will be talking about the same thing Pete's talking about, folks. Trust me, because he used to broadcast there. And now I think somebody there is watching the Rebels Edge and picking up on what Pete's laying down. So go ahead, Pete.
Well, that's very flattering, but it's this time of year, John, and we've gotten past the Super Bowl, right? I mean, we've had all that. They did fire the defensive coordinator of the 49ers. That was a bit of a surprise because you look at his numbers are actually better for the defensive side of things than his predecessor. So it's kind of interesting to see, but there's obviously something behind the scenes that we don't know. I wanted to take a look at free agency, though, John, because, we've got the combine coming up, and we'll hit that in a second. But I think this free agency market, I wanted to do a top four, and we just watched one of them, Kansas City Chiefs, Chris Jones. He's 29 years old, defensive tackle, John, and right now he's probably the most wanted player, I think, in free agency. And he's going to get some real money, John, because he's projected to get a 3-year, $84 million contract. So $28 million a year would be where he'd be at. And he's 29 years old. And what I like about this is Chris Jones doesn't play like he's 29 years old. The guy plays like he's 24 years old, maybe 25 years old. So I think he's got 3 more years worth in the tank for him. And I think that's why people are so excited. When you watched him play, he was pretty amazing. And I'll throw this one out at you, John. Where would be the best landing spot? And I think I figured it out just kind of looking around and trying to figure out who's got the money, who doesn't, who's got a lot of rookies because they're going to have more money. Well, how about Houston? They've got their quarterback. They've got their linebacker. Why not put a defensive end down there that's going to be getting after the quarterback on top of your outside linebacker, who was the rookie of the year? That could be a really, really interesting landing spot. Then there's Kirk Cousins. You got Josh Allen. You got Antoine Winfield. I will say this, Josh Allen, not the quarterback, by the way. He's the edge rusher from Jacksonville. He is an absolute beast. He's going to get the franchise tag. Antoine Winfield, in my opinion, gets the franchise tag. It's not so bad, though, John. When your franchise tag is $16.5 million to $22.5 million, not so bad. I think that's right there with what's a fair number for these players in free agency.
Well, that Chris Jones, Pete, yep, the guy that Pete was just talking about, folks, he is a beast, of course. He was a 5-star recruit out of high school. The kid is a monster. And if you remember, after San Francisco scored one of their touchdowns, he came to the sidelines and ripped his defense a new butt before Spagnuolo came over and said, all right, guys, calm down. Let's do this. Because he said, we're not doing it. And they weren't. They were making mistakes. And Chris Jones was also the guy that on our video yesterday that we showed you, Chris Jones was the guy that went unblocked when 68 from San Francisco, the offensive right tackle, just slid to the outside and gave him an unimpeded path to Purdy. I mean, dumbest play of the game, Pete, because some people might say, well, the punt hitting that kid's ankle, that kid wasn't trying to be in the way. The kid was trying to block somebody so that his guy could return it. And every once in a while, that oblong ball makes a little bit of a different bounce, and it hit him. And the other kid should have just fallen on it, obviously, not tried to pick it up. But, in that instant, do you make the right decision? But to your point, Pete, Chris Jones, beast. I would say, your buddy Harbaugh, depending what he does with Mack, yep, Khalil Mack, I think you might see, if they got rid of Khalil Mack, I think you might see them go after Chris Jones pretty hard.
Yeah. The last one, I'll just throw it out to you. Kirk Cousins. Does he come back to the Vikings? Maybe. Can they afford him? Probably not. Does he go to Pittsburgh, who's basically the only thing that they're really lacking is a quarterback, John? Or does he go to Atlanta, where they've got pockets full of money and no quarterbacks that you can find? I'm starting to think more and more that he ends up in Atlanta, which would be a really big deal, I think, if Kirk Cousins was a quarterback in Atlanta, because they have a lot of pieces. They didn't show it, but they do have a lot of pieces. They got a hell of a running back as well.
Yeah, and Pete, it's a dome.
Yeah.
So obviously half of his games are in a dome, and he's shown he's very comfortable playing in a dome. Not that he loses when he goes outside the dome. So he could be a Pittsburgh guy too, Pete. But and he went to Boston College. So either way, both those schools or both those teams are East Coast, or at least I view Atlanta as East Coast, Pete. All right, what else you got?
All right, I'm going to throw these out at you, John, because I think there are some names out there that a lot of people don't know. You and I watched enough college ball to know some of these guys, but even myself, there's one guy who's a sleeper going into the combine. And I think once the combine's over, everybody's going to say, wait a minute, we love Joe Alt. But after Joe Alt, it ain't the guy from Penn State. It's the kid from Yale, John. Kieran Amiglia. He is a beast. He's a great player. He actually did come off of an injury as well. But everything that I keep reading about and talking to different players and coaches and everything else, GMs, they're all saying, you know what, we can't wait to see what this kid does at the combine, because he's got the size, he's got the strength, he's got all that. But when you're in the Ivy League, it's a little bit more difficult to kind of assess because of different players that you're playing against there. So he'd be a fun one. Believe it or not, Penn State's got an edge rusher again. This kid, Isaac, he's a freak show. Michigan's got another offensive lineman, Zach Zinter. No one's heard of him. And one of the great names, John, I think I love this kid, and I think this kid has a shot because Georgia's got so much talent all the time. When they're looking around for a free agent, or not free agent, but somebody who could be a freak show at the combine. How about Nazir Stackhouse? That's a good name for a defensive end. This kid's going to be a freak show, and I can't wait to see what some of the numbers look like for him. And we all know that Georgia's got talent out the wazoo, but I don't know. I just think it's always fun as you get closer to the combine to try to figure out, all right, who are some of the guys that no one's heard of that suddenly jump into the first round? And I think those four, I think all four of them might get into the first round, at least two of them probably.
Yeah, and to your point, Pete, Joe Alt is a man-child. So that guy's, a definite first-rounder, maybe a top 5 pick.
Yeah.
But I'll give you some guys that I think are surprises, Pete. Not so much surprises if you really paid attention to how Duke has done. But I've got a couple guys from Duke, Pete, that have been invited to the combine. And you don't often hear about anybody but maybe the quarterback. Offensive tackle, Graham Barton. The guy's a beast, plays at Duke. I mean, again, Duke, that would have been a joke a few years ago. How about defensive linemen? There's a guy named Dwayne Carter, also at Duke. I mean, those are two big physical guys that people are going to be kind of surprised to see that Duke, even though you might have seen that, their win-loss record is better than you expected, you're probably somewhat surprised to see those guys could be high-round picks.
Yeah.
I'll say this is not a surprise. Eric All from Iowa, another tight end, they just reload. Iowa just reloads when it comes to tight ends, Pete. Obviously this tight end from Washington, because he caught a bunch this year, Delvin Culp. I think that was, we all know that the top one is really your guy from Georgia, Pete, Brock Bowers from Napa. But he is going to be a beast. As far as running backs, again, take a look at what Blake Corum at Michigan. That kid looks like he could be special in the pros to me. So be interesting to see what his 40 times are. Be interesting to see what his strength is. But the strength of him is his production on the field, not if he runs a 4.3, not if he benches 30 times with 225, but his body of work is better than any of that.
Yeah, I think these guys, these GMs need to focus more on the video, John, and what they're actually seeing than just these numbers. The numbers can be impressive and kind of put you somewhere else too, but always interesting. And I think Corum, he sure looks a lot like, I hate to say it, he's not Barry Sanders, but he's got a lot of that same kind of quality, his size, his strength, his speed, and that type of thing. He doesn't have quite the same stopping and going sort of agility that Barry Sanders had, but he's a special player for sure. And those tight ends you mentioned, they might all end up going to the LA Chargers. I wonder why with Harbaugh there.
Well, and Pete Hartman, who went and transferred to Notre Dame, Sam Hartman, he's a heartthrob already. So he's kind of like your Garoppolo, but he's like Garoppolo with better skills, I think, Pete. This kid can sling the ball. Yeah. But he's good when people see him working out, if he shows up at the combine. These are just the invitees, folks. Not guaranteed all of them will show up. Some of the quarterbacks prefer to do, private workouts for the, for the scouts rather than just show up at the combine. But a bunch of them are going to show up. And Bo Nix, Pete, I love that kid too.
Ooh, stud. Yep, I agree with you, John. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. A lot in front of us for football.
Well, you know the drill, folks. As we said, we're here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But next week, Monday, we will not be back. We'll be back Tuesday. Why is that? That's because Monday's a holiday. It's President's Day. So nobody's going to be trading. We got no show on Monday. So we'll be back Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Take care. See you then. Bang.